Can you be my dad for just one day? The words fell like rain itself, soft yet shattering, cutting through the noise of New York and straight into the silence Ethan Reed had lived in for 5 years. If stories of love, healing, and second chances speak to your heart, please subscribe and stay with us until the final light of this journey. The night hung heavy over Bryant Park, where autumn rain blurred the reflection of city lights across slick cobblestones. Ethan Reed sat alone on a weathered bench, his umbrella tilted just enough to hide his face from the world that hailed him as one of Manhattan's youngest billionaires, the genius behind Reed Innovations, the man who conquered the market yet couldn't conquer his own emptiness. He had just left a closed-door meeting with investors at the New York Public Library. Another deal sealed, another victory hollow. As the rain deepened, he watched people rush across 42nd Street, faces ghosted behind umbrellas, and felt a familiar ache, the one that came every night when he went home to silence. Then came a small sound, footsteps, light and hesitant, splashing through puddles. He looked up. A little girl stood there, no older than 4. Her blonde hair clung to her face, her red coat soaked through. She hugged a small, damp teddy bear against her chest. Her shoes were mismatched, one pink and one white, and both untied. Yet what struck Ethan wasn't her disarray, it was her eyes. Wide, gray-blue eyes that looked at him not with fear, but trust. An impossible kind of trust. "Sweetheart, where are your parents?" Ethan asked, lowering his umbrella. She blinked, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Mom said she'd be back in 5 minutes, but it's been so long." Then she took a cautious step closer, lifting her chin. "Can you be my dad for just one day?" The words knocked the air from his lungs. He froze, staring at her, heart hammering like a sudden storm. He wanted to tell her he couldn't, that she should find a police officer or call her mother. But when she lifted her hand to wipe her tears, Ethan saw something. A thin, red string tied around her wrist, frayed but intact. It couldn't be. That string. His mind burned back to a different night, 5 years ago, in a vineyard outside Napa Valley. Sophie Rivers, barefoot in the twilight, laughing as he tied that same kind of red string around her wrist, saying it would keep her and their unborn baby safe while he was away on business. Then came the call, the crash, the announcement. No survivors. Ethan had buried that memory, and his heart, since that day. But now, in the middle of a rain-drenched park, stood a little girl wearing that same fragile thread of fate. He swallowed hard. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emma," she said. "Emma Brooks." The surname hit him like glass breaking. Sophie's mother's maiden name. He knew it instantly. Emma looked up at him again. "Mom says Dad's fix broken things. My bear's arm came off. Can you help him?" Her voice trembled on the edge of hope. Ethan reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he took the bear and examined the torn seam. He hadn't sewn anything since college, but he found himself pulling a small handkerchief from his pocket and wrapping the bear's arm carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Better?" he asked. Emma nodded, her eyes brightening. "You're really good at fixing things," she said with a small smile that pierced the fog around his heart. Ethan exhaled slowly. He didn't know how to tell her that he was a man who had built empires yet couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most, the life he'd lost. "Where's your mom now?" he asked. Emma pointed toward the far end of the park, where the rain turned the night into a silver haze. "She went to find help. She said to stay here until she comes back." Her voice faltered. "But she's been gone a long time." Ethan's gaze followed the direction of her tiny finger, but all he saw was darkness and the blur of passing headlights. His gut twisted. Every instinct, The logical, disciplined part of him told him to call security or the police. But the deeper instinct, the one that had been buried under grief and guilt for 5 years, said something else. "All right," he said quietly. "Then until she comes back, I'll stay." Emma's small hand slipped into his. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but she smiled. "Thank you, Daddy Ethan." He didn't correct her. He couldn't. Rain fell harder, soaking his coat, dripping from his hair, but he didn't move. He just sat there, the little girl leaning against him, her head resting on his arm, the city blurring around them like a watercolor dream. For the first time in years, Ethan Reed, the man who had everything, felt something awaken inside him. Not victory, not ambition. Something purer, something that whispered, "This is what was stolen from you." And as the clock on 42nd Street struck midnight, he realized that the smallest voice in the rain had just changed the course of his life forever. The elevator climbed like a measured breath, each floor ding a polite reminder that life moved on whether a man could keep up with it or not. Ethan stood with rain drying on his cuffs, the scent of Bryant Park still clinging to him. Wet grass, taxi exhaust, the faint sweetness of roasted chestnuts drifting in from 42nd Street. Somewhere below, the city pulsed with certainty. Up here, in the shaft of mirrored steel rising through Hudson Yards, everything felt too quiet to trust. The private lobby unfolded when the doors opened. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed the Hudson River, a ribbon of dark metal under a bruised sky. His penthouse was a study in restraint. Oak, limestone, charcoal, art that suggested taste without nostalgia. For years he had chosen pieces that did not ask questions. Tonight, even the silence interrogated him. He set his phone on the console and loosened his tie. The red thread on the child's wrist flashed in his mind. No, not a thread. A signal flare fired from 5 years ago, landing at his feet in the rain. Emma. Emma Brooks. He whispered the name once, as if saying it too loudly might make it vanish. He crossed the living room and paused at the tall painting that disguised the wall safe. Not even his assistants knew what rested behind it. With a press of his palm to the concealed panel, the canvas swung out on silent hinges. A keypad blinked awake. He typed the code without looking. The number had lived in his bones long after he tried to forget it. The lock released with a soft, mechanical sigh. Inside lay the things he never allowed himself to touch. He had called them relics when he was trying to be clinical, contraband when he was trying to be strong. But they were simply a life suspended, a sealed envelope fat with handwritten pages, a small velvet pouch, a hospital printout folded 3 times, a Polaroid that knew too much. He sat on the low bench by the window and began with the ultrasound. Grainy arcs, a dark pearl at the center of light. The sonographer at Queen of the Valley, Napa, June, had circled the profile with a cheerful marker and written tiny notes. Heartbeat steady, 10 fingers like a piano. Next appointment Tuesday. He had flown in for that scan, hands shaking as he held Sophie's, pretending he was calm for her. She kept giggling at the gel, whispering, "Cold as Atlantic water." And he kept pretending he did not want to live inside that room forever, where a small storm beat its rhythm into the world. He placed the paper down and opened the velvet pouch. The red string lay coiled like a small horizon. Napa dust had once lived in its fibers. He could still see the vineyard light, late afternoon slanting through leaves. Sophie barefoot on terracotta, her hair twisted into a knot with a paintbrush shoved through it. Her laugh when he said a superstition could be a plan. He had tied the string around her wrist, and then, for luck around his, 2 loops connected by nothing but hope. "It is not magic," she had said, teasing him. "It is just a reminder." He had answered, Then let it remind me of everything I must become. He unfolded the letter next. Her script tilted like a coastline. Dear you, it began, because they had joked that names were too formal for promises. If you are reading this, it means I could not say these words out loud without crying. I am keeping the tiny room off the kitchen for the baby's paints. I bought primer. The window there looks west. You promised me a sunset life. I will hold you to it. He held the paper until the edges softened under his grip. Sunset life. He had promised to step out of the velocity of Reed Innovations, promised to slow his bloodstream to the beat of family. He had even set the date. The board had smiled their measured smiles and said, after the quarterly, and he, too good at negotiating with himself, had agreed. Then the call had come on a slate-gray morning over the Atlantic. A commuter plane out of Santa Rosa. Engine failure reported. Descent over coastal hills. No survivors confirmed. He remembered not the words, but the sensation. The floor of the plane he was in tilting while the sky remained still. For months after, his dreams had the wrong gravity. He reached for the Polaroid. Sophie on a wooden step outside the tasting room, painting a rough square of sky on scrap wood for the baby's wall. She had turned when he lifted the camera, surprised into a grin that made her look both younger and more invincible. In the corner of the photo, a thumbprint of red paint. We will call it our small sky, she had said that day. So if the world forgets us, we will still have weather. He returned everything to the bench, except the string. He wound it once around his finger, feeling the faint burr of the knot where he had tied it. The image of Emma standing in the rain gathered itself and would not soften. The way she had lifted her chin. The way she had trusted him. The surname, Brooks, taken from Sophie's mother, because Sophie had once said she loved the sound of water in names. And the way Emma had asked for something so specific it became impossible to deny. Not forever, just a day. Children understood contracts better than attorneys. They knew what mattered. He stood, breathing against the window's cold. He could see his reflection. The suited man who never missed. Behind it, the river moved like a second self that did not care who watched. Logic arranged itself in his head. Dates, timelines, probabilities. It was a trusted instrument. Tonight, the instrument refused to play. The math of her eyes had no solution that did not include love. He took out his phone and opened a secure file labeled only with a vineyard icon. The last text Sophie had sent glowed there, preserved by a man who had rehearsed letting go and failed. Flight after quarterly, it read. Save me the west window. Bring peaches. He had brought nothing. He had arrived to flower wreaths and a press release. His hand curled around the phone until the screen went black. If it is true, he said into the empty room. If she lived, then someone stole 5 years from my child. The word child was a cliff he stepped off without bracing. He put the red string in his breast pocket and closed the safe. The canvas swung back, hiding the lock like a sealed mouth. He did not turn on music, or news, or the flawless machine that made sleep from schedules. He stood in the hush of the penthouse and let the shape of the loss be honest. Then he reached for his coat, took the private stair to the garage, and made a single promise to the dark. No more relics, no more contraband. If the past had survived, he would meet it in the present, name it, and never let it go again. The following morning, the Manhattan skyline glimmered through pale fog, but Ethan Reed had no eyes for its perfection. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, coffee untouched, staring at the news ticker scrolling across the opposite building. Markets rose, deals closed, names flashed, but none of it belonged to him anymore. Somewhere out there was a child with his eyes and Sophie's smile, and the world had gone on pretending she didn't exist. He turned toward the table where his tablet lay open to a private file labeled Reed Security Division. Only a handful of people in the company knew this department existed, a legacy of his father's paranoia. Ethan had inherited it, refined it, and used it sparingly. But today, it wasn't about competitors or hostile takeovers. Today, it was about a little girl in a red coat. He spoke into the encrypted line. Run a discreet background on an Emma Brooks, around 4 years old. Possible residence in Napa County, California. Mother's name? He hesitated. Sophie Rivers. There was a pause on the other end. Sir, Sophie Rivers was— Do it, Ethan interrupted softly, quietly. As the line disconnected, he felt the weight of the order settle over him. Every instinct as a CEO screamed for control, for protocol, for boundaries. But the father in him, the one he'd never been allowed to be, refused to wait. Hours stretched like a wire pulled too tight. He buried himself in meetings, numbers, reports, but every face, every sentence blurred into the sound of Emma's voice. Can you be my dad for just one day? When his phone finally buzzed, his pulse leapt. Sir, his head of security said, we found them. Napa Valley, small town outside Calistoga. Address registered under S. Brooks. Property leased 5 years ago. 1 adult female, 1 child. Ethan didn't remember giving any further orders. By evening, he was on a red-eye flight to San Francisco, the Hudson Lights falling away beneath him like pieces of a life that no longer fit. He sat by the window, the hum of the engines merging with his thoughts. What would he even say to her? What right did he have to knock on that door after all this time? You're alive. You took our daughter. You left me with ghosts. No sentence seemed right. Not for the woman he had once loved more than truth itself. When the plane touched down at dawn, he rented a car and drove north through the mist. Vineyards rolled along the hillsides like folded green silk, dew clinging to every vine. It was all as he remembered. Except this time, he wasn't chasing a memory. He was chasing blood, breath, and the chance to hold what had been stolen from him. At the edge of a narrow country road, he saw it. A small yellow house with white shutters and a porch strung with wind chimes. Lavender grew wild along the fence, and a child's pink rain boots sat neatly by the steps. His heart stuttered. The scene was so peaceful, so alive it almost hurt. Through the kitchen window, he saw her. Sophie. Her hair was shorter now, streaked faintly with sunlight, and she wore an old linen dress splattered with paint. She was bent over a canvas, one hand steadying it, the other brushing delicate strokes of color, the same gentle precision that once painted joy into his days. Time hadn't erased her softness. It had only deepened it. He opened the car door, but froze halfway out. His hand gripped the frame. For a long moment, he simply watched, the way her shoulders moved with the rhythm of the brush, the quiet hum of a melody he couldn't hear. Then, a sound drifted through the open window. "Mommy!" Emma's voice. Ethan's breath caught. A small figure darted into view, the little girl from Bryant Park, hair now dry, wearing pajamas patterned with tiny stars. She climbed onto her mother's lap and pressed a kiss to her cheek. "Good morning, sunshine," Sophie murmured, smiling. "Did you sleep well?" Emma giggled, pointing at the painting. "It's us!" Sophie looked down at the canvas. It was a watercolor of 2 figures beneath a red umbrella, a mother and a child, standing in what looked like a city park. Bryant Park. Ethan's throat tightened. So Sophie knew. She had been there that night. Maybe she had seen him. Maybe she had planned it all. He felt an ache surge inside his chest. Anger, love, disbelief tangled into something unbearable. She had hidden herself, hidden their daughter, built a life in the quiet while he had been mourning them both. The realization was sharp enough to make his vision blur. Emma's laughter echoed through the open air, clear and full of light. Sophie brushed a strand of hair from the child's forehead, her voice low and tender. "Your daddy would have loved that painting, sweetheart." The words hit him like a blow. Would have. Past tense. As if he were gone. As if he had died with the story she told their daughter. He stepped back from the car, unable to breathe. 5 years ago, he had buried an empty coffin. Now he was the one haunting the living. The wind carried the chime's soft music as he turned away. He couldn't face her yet, not with fury tangled so tightly around his grief. He needed to know why. Who had told her to disappear? Who had let him mourn a lie? Ethan got back into the car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. The vineyard stretched endlessly before him, the air heavy with the scent of soil and regret. He whispered to himself, "The promise breaking out like a vow. They took my right to be her father. I'm taking it back." And as the sun climbed over the Napa Hills, Ethan Reed, the man the world called untouchable, began the quietest, most personal war of his life. Morning light spilled over the valley, pouring gold across the vines and dusting the yellow house in quiet warmth. The air smelled of damp soil and paint thinner. Ethan Reed stood on the dirt road just beyond the fence, fingers curled around the red string in his pocket. He had spent the night in a motel off Silverado Trail, pacing until the clock bled into dawn. He couldn't run from this anymore. Not from Sophie. Not from Emma. Not from the years that had been stolen from them all. He parked his car by the fence and crossed the short path to the porch. Every step echoed louder than the one before. His shadow touched the front door first. Then came the knock, soft but heavy with everything unsaid. The door creaked open. Sophie Rivers stood there, paint still streaked across her wrist, a blue smudge on her cheek. For a moment she simply stared, her breath catching like a brush mid-stroke. Then she whispered his name, as if tasting it after years of silence. "Ethan." Her voice broke the last wall inside him. He wanted to speak, to ask how she could still be alive, to demand why she had let him grieve a grave that was never filled. But all that came out was a trembling whisper. "You're real." Sophie's hand tightened on the doorknob. Her eyes shimmered, not with fear, but with the sorrow of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said quietly. "Not from the press, not from a file, but not yet, either." Ethan took a step forward. "You disappeared. They told me your plane went down. There were no survivors. I buried an empty coffin." His voice cracked. "Why, Sophie? Why didn't you tell me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because they didn't let me." The words hit him harder than any accusation. "Who?" he demanded, though he already knew the answer. Sophie drew in a shaky breath. "Your mother, Margaret Reed." The air between them shifted, sharp as glass. Ethan felt the name pierce through memory, the matriarch of Reed Innovations, the woman who once told him that love is fragile, legacy is not. Sophie looked away, voice barely above a whisper. "After the crash, I was taken to a private hospital in Santa Rosa. I was unconscious for days. When I woke, she was there." "She said you'd moved on, that you were about to marry someone else. She said the press would destroy you if they learned about me. That the board would never forgive the scandal of a pregnant artist with no degree, no pedigree." Her lips trembled. "She told me the best thing I could do for you was disappear." Ethan's jaw tightened. She lied. She did more than lie, Sophie said. She made sure no one could find me, changed my records, paid for the house, sent money under another name for the first year, then stopped when I refused to give up Emma for adoption. She said your future depended on forgetting us. The world seemed to tilt. He saw again the woman who had raised him to believe that compassion was weakness. He had mistaken her control for love. So you raised our daughter alone, believing I didn't want her. Sophie's shoulders sank. What else could I think? I wrote you letters, Ethan. Every month for a year. None were answered. I thought you'd made your choice. He pressed a hand to his forehead, his heart hammering against bone. I never got them, he whispered. Not one. Behind Sophie, small footsteps pattered across the wooden floor. Emma appeared, her hair in messy curls, still in her pajamas. She blinked at the tall man in the doorway. Mommy, is he? Sophie knelt down, stroking her daughter's hair. It's okay, sweetheart, this is... She looked up at Ethan, unsure what word to use. Ethan crouched, eyes level with the child. The sight of her up close again made him ache. Hi, Emma, he said softly. It's me. Remember Bryant Park? Emma's face brightened with recognition. You fixed my bear. She smiled, proud and innocent. Mommy, he's Daddy Ethan. Sophie's breath caught. The words hung in the air like a fragile prayer. Ethan's eyes glistened as he whispered, Yeah, sweetheart, it's me. For a long heartbeat, time stood still. Sophie looked from the man she'd once loved to the daughter they had created. A family divided by deceit, reunited by chance. Then Emma wrapped her tiny arms around Ethan's neck. I told Mommy you'd come, she said. I told her you'd find us. Ethan closed his eyes, holding her carefully, afraid she might vanish if he breathed too hard. I'll never lose you again, he murmured. When she ran off to fetch her bear, Sophie and Ethan stood in silence, the space between them thick with memory and guilt. She deserves to know the truth, Ethan said quietly, and I deserve to be her father. Sophie hesitated. I'm scared, Ethan. You don't know what your mother can do. If she finds out you're here, she'll... She already knows, he interrupted, voice cold with resolve. And I don't care. She took 5 years from me. From us. I won't let her take another second. Sophie's eyes softened. You've changed. No, he said. I finally became the man you asked me to be. Outside, the wind moved through the vines, whispering like a voice from the past. Inside, Ethan reached for Sophie's hand, not to claim, but to promise. No one will ever separate us again, he said. Not family, not fear, not power. For the first time since Napa burned itself into memory, Sophie let him hold her hand. And as sunlight poured through the window, brushing gold over their joined fingers, Ethan knew that forgiveness would be a long road. But this was where it began. The morning after the truth came out, the sky above Napa Valley unfurled like a watercolor wash, soft, blue, and trembling with promise. Dew still clung to the grape leaves outside Sophie's porch, and for once, Ethan Reed didn't feel like the man who built empires. He felt like a man who was finally beginning to understand what he'd lost. He stood by the kitchen counter in rolled-up sleeves, watching Sophie pour pancake batter into a cast-iron pan. The sound of sizzling filled the small room, mingling with the scent of butter and coffee. The space was humble. No marble countertops, no glass walls, no trace of the Manhattan skyline. And yet, he couldn't remember the last time a room had felt so alive. Emma sat at the table, legs swinging, chin resting on her palms. Daddy Ethan, she said between bites of syrupy pancake, Are you going back to your big glass house today? Ethan smiled faintly. Not today. Good, she said firmly, 'cause Mommy said you're going to spend the whole day with me. Sophie glanced up, hiding a shy smile behind her coffee cup. That's what we agreed, remember? One day, just the two of you. One day, Ethan repeated softly, the words heavy with meaning. For 5 years, he'd lived in boardrooms and deadlines, surrounded by people who would have sold their souls for a piece of his time. And yet, this one simple day, felt like the most expensive thing he'd ever earned. They began at Central Park. Sophie had driven down to the city with them but gave father and daughter their space, staying a few benches away with a sketchbook in hand. The park was alive with the smell of roasted peanuts and laughter. Children ran across the grass. A saxophonist played somewhere near Bethesda Fountain. Emma tugged his hand toward the ice cream stand. Mommy says vanilla is boring, but you look like a vanilla person. Ethan laughed. I've been called worse. They bought 2 cones, and Emma made it her mission to get more sprinkles on his than on hers. She ended up with chocolate on her nose, giggling so hard she nearly dropped her cone. Ethan knelt to wipe her face, and she touched his cheek with sticky fingers. Daddy, Ethan, you're smiling. He blinked. I am? Yeah, like this. She scrunched her face into an exaggerated grin, missing her 2 front teeth. He couldn't help but laugh, a sound that startled him, because it had been so long since it came from somewhere real. They spent hours wandering. They rode the carousel, fed ducks by the pond, and bought matching balloon bracelets from a vendor who called them the happiest pair in the park. For lunch, they shared a pretzel bigger than Emma's head. Every time she slipped her tiny hand into his, something inside him healed that he didn't know was broken. As afternoon light stretched golden across the trees, Emma's eyes caught the gleaming reflection of the distant Coney Island Ferris wheel on a souvenir poster. Can we go there, Daddy, Ethan? Mommy said she's never been, but you have a car that can go anywhere. He glanced at Sophie, who smiled and shrugged. If you're up for it, she said. An hour later, they stood before the ocean, its waves foaming against the pier. Emma squealed at the sight of the Ferris wheel, clutching his hand as they climbed into one of the red cars. The ride began slow, the city growing smaller beneath them, the sea stretching infinite and blue. Halfway up, Emma pressed her forehead to the glass. Mommy says angels live in the clouds, she whispered. Do you think she's right? Ethan followed her gaze. I think maybe angels look like people who love us enough to stay. Then you're one too, she said simply. His chest tightened. The wind brushed through her hair, carrying a whisper of Sophie's perfume, the scent of paint, rain, and lavender. When the Ferris wheel paused at the top, he looked down at the world below, the boardrooms, the towers, the empire that once defined him, and realized none of it compared to the small hand holding his. That evening, the 3 of them sat on the beach as the sun melted into the horizon. Sophie rested on a blanket beside them, sketching the ocean in soft charcoal strokes. Emma lay between them, clutching her repaired teddy bear, its arm neatly stitched with red thread. She's falling asleep, Sophie murmured. Ethan nodded. She had a big day. She's been waiting for this day for years, Sophie said quietly, even if she didn't know it. He turned to her. The glow of the sunset painted her face in amber light. And you? He asked. Have you been waiting too? Sophie didn't answer right away. She looked toward the ocean, waves breathing in and out. Every day, she said finally, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose her. Or lose you again. You won't, Ethan said, his voice steady. I'm done running. Sophie glanced at him, searching his eyes for the man she once knew. You've changed. So have you, he replied softly. You built a life out of nothing. You raised her with grace. I don't deserve either of you, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying. She looked down at Emma, her fingers brushing a curl from the child's forehead. Then start by keeping your promise. One day. Ethan smiled faintly. Then I'll make this day last forever. He reached for Sophie's hand as the last light faded, and though she didn't pull away, neither did she fully yield. There was still a wall between them, but now it had a door. Later that night, after they carried Emma to bed, Ethan stood at the doorway of the small room filled with toys and paint-splattered canvases. Emma slept deeply, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. Sophie leaned against the frame beside him. She dreams of you, you know, Sophie whispered. She used to draw you as a hero, always holding an umbrella in the rain. Ethan's eyes softened. Maybe I was just trying to find my way back to her. When he turned to leave, Sophie stopped him. Ethan, she said gently, whatever happens next, thank you for giving her today. He nodded, voice low. She gave me something too. Sophie tilted her head. What's that? He smiled. A reason to come home. Outside, the Pacific wind carried the faint echo of the Ferris wheel's laughter. And for the first time in years, Ethan Reed walked into the night not as a CEO, but as a father, his heart full, his future uncertain, and his resolve unbreakable. The morning after their perfect day, peace shattered like glass. Ethan woke in Sophie's guest room to the soft sound of birds outside and the smell of coffee drifting through the hallway. For the first time in years, he'd slept without nightmares. He smiled faintly, remembering Emma's laughter, her sticky fingers clinging to his sleeve at Coney Island. But as he reached for his phone on the nightstand, the world he thought he'd left behind came roaring back. His screen was filled with notifications, calls from board members, texts from his assistant, and one headline flashing across every news feed in America. Reed Innovations CEO's hidden family in Napa Valley. The words hit him like a physical blow. He tapped the link, and the photo loaded, clear as daylight, cruel as truth. It was him, holding Emma's hand, Sophie standing beside them, smiling, sunlight catching her hair. The image was perfect. Too perfect. A professional zoom shot from a distance, not coincidence. Someone had followed them. Ethan's breath hardened. He scrolled further. Tabloids dissecting the scandal, investors demanding statements, pundits debating the moral cost of deception. And beneath it all, the markets reacting. Reed Innovations down 14% overnight. He barely noticed Sophie standing in the doorway, her face pale. Ethan, she whispered, it's everywhere. He turned the screen toward her. She covered her mouth, eyes wide. Oh, God. How did they... There was a camera, he said flatly. At Coney Island. Someone planted it. Emma's small voice echoed from down the hall. Mommy? Daddy Ethan? Ethan forced a breath, trying to calm himself before answering, but his pulse pounded like thunder. He walked to the window, pulling back the curtain. A black SUV idled on the dirt road outside, tinted windows reflecting the morning sun. His phone rang again. He didn't need to check the caller ID. Mother, he answered. Ethan. Margaret Reed's voice came crisp, composed, the tone of a woman who'd spent her life turning emotions into liabilities. You need to fix this. Now. Good morning to you too, he said dryly. Don't play games. The board's in chaos. The press is camped outside Reed Tower. If you don't issue a statement denying paternity, you'll lose the company. He felt the words like a chill down his spine. Deny paternity, he repeated. She's my daughter, Mother. Her voice sharpened. She's a risk. That woman manipulated you once. Now she's doing it again. You think the shareholders will care about your healing story? They'll see scandal. They'll see weakness. Ethan's jaw tightened. You made sure the world thought they were dead. You did this. You're the reason my daughter grew up without a father. Careful, she warned. You're emotional. That's when you make mistakes. He closed his eyes. The only mistake I made was believing you understood love. A long silence followed. Then her tone dropped, low and dangerous. If you don't distance yourself, I'll call an emergency board session. You'll be removed by noon. He looked out at Sophie standing in the kitchen, trying to hide her shaking hands as she poured milk for Emma. If I lose everything, he said quietly, then so be it. Some things are worth losing for. He ended the call before she could reply. By noon, the house was surrounded. Reporters lined the street, microphones raised, camera flashes igniting like lightning. Sophie drew the curtains, trembling. They're shouting questions, Ethan. About Emma, about me. I know, he said, tightening the lock on the front door. They won't stop until they have blood. Emma peeked out from behind the couch. Are they bad people? Ethan knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her face. No, sweetheart, they're just confused. Like when I thought clouds were made of cotton candy? He smiled faintly. Exactly like that. But behind the calm, anger surged, a cold, focused rage. Someone had leaked those photos, someone close. And Ethan knew exactly who had both motive and access. His mother's personal aide, a former corporate publicist trained to handle family optics. He paced the living room, dialing a number on his private line. Marshall, he said to his security chief, track the original metadata on the Coney Island photos. I want the photographer, payment record, GPS, everything. Already on it, came the reply. Preliminary scan shows the upload came from a corporate device, Reed Innovations' internal network. Ethan's stomach clenched. Then she used my own company to destroy me. He hung up, the decision already forming like steel in his mind. He could weather financial collapse. He could rebuild. But he would not let his daughter's name become fodder for entertainment. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the vineyards, Ethan stood outside, phone pressed to his ear. Release my official statement, he said to his assistant. No denials, no damage control, just truth. Sir, the PR team advises. I don't care what they advise, he cut in. Write this. I'm not hiding a family. I'm finally reclaiming one. Sophie appeared behind him, voice trembling. You don't have to do this, Ethan. They'll crucify you in the media. He turned to her, eyes steady. They already are. But if I stay silent, they'll destroy you. They'll destroy Emma. She shook her head. You'll lose everything. He smiled faintly. Maybe it's time I learn what everything really means. That night, the news exploded again, but this time it was Ethan's voice leading the headlines. In a brief televised statement, he stood on the steps of the Napa County Courthouse, cameras flashing all around. His tie was gone, his tone clear, calm, human. Yes, he said, the rumors are true. The woman in those photos is someone I once loved. The little girl holding my hand is my daughter. I didn't lose them. I was made to believe they were gone. If that costs me my position, so be it. But the truth is worth more than any title I've ever held. For a moment, the press fell silent. Then the questions came in waves, but he didn't stay to answer. He turned, walked back into the dusk, and for the first time, the cameras didn't capture a CEO. They captured a man free of fear. That night, in the quiet house, Sophie stood at the window as he tucked Emma into bed. The little girl whispered sleepily, "Daddy Ethan, are we in trouble?" He kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart. We're just telling the truth." When he turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, Sophie's eyes met his, full of awe, gratitude, and something deeper. "You really would risk everything for us?" He nodded. "I already did." Outside, distant sirens blended with the hum of crickets. And though the world outside was chaos, inside that small house, the air was still. Ethan Reed, once the man who lived for control, had finally surrendered to something far stronger than power: love unafraid of consequence. The wind off the Hudson carried the bite of winter when Ethan Reed returned to New York. Reed Tower, 48 stories of glass, steel, and legacy, loomed before him like an empire built from silence. For 5 years, he'd entered those doors as its sovereign. Today, he entered as its heretic. Security guards shifted uncomfortably as he walked past, flanked by reporters shouting questions he no longer cared to answer. Inside, the marble lobby gleamed beneath cold light. Every surface whispered the same word: control. But Ethan had learned something the board never would. Love couldn't be controlled, only protected. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. His reflection in the mirrored wall looked like someone he used to know: the immaculate suit, the measured calm. Yet behind that calm burned something new: conviction. When the doors slid open, the war room of Reed Innovations waited. The board had already gathered, 12 figures in tailored armor, all pretending they weren't afraid. At the head of the table sat Margaret Reed, immaculate in charcoal silk, eyes sharp as a ledger. Her expression didn't move when she saw her son. "Ethan," she said, her tone smooth as polished stone, "I was wondering when you'd come crawling back." He took the seat opposite her. "I'm not crawling. I'm standing." "Not for long," one of the directors murmured. "Your statement caused a public meltdown. Investors are demanding accountability." Ethan glanced at the man, his voice low but steady. "Accountability is exactly why I'm here." He placed a folder on the table, thick, bound, and stamped confidential. Inside this are the financial documents proving that Reed Innovations used company resources to manipulate private records, specifically falsified medical and travel reports from 5 years ago. Margaret's jaw tightened. "You're overstepping, Ethan." "No," he said. "I'm uncovering what you buried. You didn't just destroy a family. You broke federal law." The room went silent. Someone at the end of the table shifted uncomfortably. Ethan opened the folder, sliding a photo across the surface. It was a hospital report from Santa Rosa General, dated a week after the supposed crash. Sophie Rivers, condition stable. "Do you remember this, Mother?" His voice dropped. "Because I do. I remember burying a coffin you knew was empty." Margaret's gaze flickered, but her composure didn't crack. "Everything I did was to protect you, to protect this company. She was beneath you. A distraction." "A distraction?" he repeated, incredulous. "She's the mother of your granddaughter." The word granddaughter landed like thunder in the room. Margaret inhaled slowly, her voice turning cold. "You've humiliated our name. You've made Reed Innovations a circus. Do you even understand what you've cost us?" "Yes," Ethan said. "I cost us the illusion." He stood, eyes sweeping the room. "Reed Innovations was founded on the promise that we make life better for families, that technology should serve the human heart. Somewhere along the way, we forgot what a family even is." A few directors avoided his gaze. Others stared, transfixed. Margaret leaned forward. "And what do you plan to do, Ethan? Run this company like a charity? Replace investors with orphans?" He looked directly at her. "No, I plan to start over, without the lies." She laughed quietly. "Start over? The board's already voted to remove you." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here to make it official." From his briefcase, he drew out a single sheet, his letter of resignation, and laid it on the table. "Effective immediately, I resign as CEO of Reed Innovations." Murmurs rippled through the room. Margaret's composure faltered for the first time. "You're throwing away everything your father built." "No," he said softly. "I'm finally building what he wanted. Honesty." He turned toward the press wall of glass that overlooked the city. Below, the streets of Manhattan stretched endless and alive. He spoke not just to them, but to the invisible millions watching through every lens. "I won't let power define who I am. I won't let reputation decide who I can love. A company can replace a CEO, but a little girl can't replace her father." Then he faced his mother one last time. "You taught me how to win, Margaret, but she taught me why." The doors opened behind him. Sophie stood there, holding Emma's hand. Security had tried to stop her, but Ethan had arranged their entrance hours ago. The sight of them, the quiet grace of Sophie, the wonder in Emma's eyes, filled the sterile room with something it had never known: warmth. Margaret's lips parted in shock. "You brought them here?" "Yes," Ethan said, "because this is the place where truth was buried, and where it ends." Emma let go of her mother's hand and ran forward, hugging Ethan's leg. "Daddy, are we going home now?" He smiled down at her. "Yeah, sweetheart, we're going home." A murmur spread among the board members, a realization that this wasn't a scandal unfolding but a man reclaiming his life. The cameras outside the glass wall clicked like distant applause. Margaret's voice cracked for the first time. "Ethan, if you walk out that door, you'll have nothing." He looked back at her, eyes steady. "You're wrong. I'll have everything." He took Sophie's hand, lifted Emma into his arms, and turned toward the exit. The doors of Reed Tower closed behind them with a hiss, like the last breath of a dying empire. Outside, the winter air was sharp, but the world felt lighter. Reporters shouted questions, flashes exploded, but all Ethan saw was the reflection of his daughter's face pressed against his shoulder, safe, unafraid. Sophie looked at him, tears glinting. "What happens now?" He smiled faintly. "Now, we live. On our terms." They walked through the chaos together, three silhouettes against the glow of 1,000 cameras. A man who had lost the world and finally found home. Rain returned to New York the next morning, the kind that fell sideways, rattling windows and street signs, washing the city clean in a way that always felt temporary. Inside Sophie's small apartment on Riverside Drive, the television glowed with breaking news. Ethan Reed resigns. He chose love over power. Every major network played the clip from Reed Tower. Ethan's voice steady, his daughter's small hand in his. The moment had become a national phenomenon. Talk shows dissected it. Journalists called it the fall of a king, the rise of a father. But for Ethan, the storm was only beginning. He stood by the window, tie undone, watching the raindrops race down the glass. Behind him, Sophie folded Emma's drawings into a portfolio for safekeeping. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," she said quietly. "Some want interviews. Others want to sue." Ethan turned. "Let them. I told the truth. That's all I have left." She hesitated. "And your mother?" He exhaled slowly. Her lawyers filed a petition this morning for temporary custody of Emma, claiming I'm emotionally unstable. Sophie froze. She's trying to take her again? She's scared, Ethan said. When people like her lose control, they destroy what they can't own. The room fell silent, broken only by the hum of the rain. Sophie's eyes filled with quiet fear, not for herself, but for Emma. What are you going to do? What I should have done 5 years ago, he said, reaching for his coat. Protect my family, not my company. That afternoon, they arrived at Stanford Auditorium in California, not for a corporate event, but for something far greater. Ethan had been invited by a group of Stanford business students to speak about ethical leadership in a modern world. He hadn't planned to accept, but now, with the world watching and his reputation hanging in the balance, he realized it wasn't just an invitation. It was a chance to speak directly to those who would shape the next generation of power. When he walked onto the stage, the room went silent. Hundreds of students, reporters, and executives filled the hall. Cameras streamed live. The same man who once ruled the skyline now stood in a simple gray suit. No notes, no script, just truth. He began quietly. My name is Ethan Reed. Until yesterday, I was the CEO of Reed Innovations, a company my family built over 3 generations. We created technologies that changed cities, industries, lives. But somewhere in that success, I lost my own. A murmur ran through the audience. He continued, voice deep and unwavering. I believed power could replace purpose. That reputation could protect love. I was wrong. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. 5 years ago, I lost a woman I loved, or thought I did. I lost a child I never knew was alive. And when I finally found them again, I realized something simple. You can't lead people if you've forgotten what makes you human. Someone from the back called out, Do you regret leaving your empire? Ethan smiled faintly. Empires fall. Families endure. If your success demands that you sacrifice compassion, then it's not success. It's vanity. The audience erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. On social media, hashtags exploded within minutes. He chose love, the Reed speech, human over power. Sophie watched from backstage, tears glistening. Emma sat on her lap, wearing a tiny red ribbon in her hair, clapping with all the joy in her small hands. Ethan's closing words echoed through the hall. Technology should never replace empathy. Leadership isn't about control, it's about courage. And the bravest thing I ever did wasn't running a company. It was choosing to be a father. When the applause rose like thunder, Sophie felt something shift. The man who once defined himself by profit had become a symbol of principle. And though storms raged outside, the hall glowed with something brighter than reputation. Conviction. But outside, the real storm gathered. By the time they returned to Napa that evening, paparazzi vans lined the road to Sophie's house. Flashbulbs burst through the rain as reporters shouted questions. Ethan, is it true the board's suing you for breach of fiduciary duty? Mr. Reed, are you afraid of losing custody? Miss Rivers, how long were you hiding your daughter? Sophie flinched, pulling Emma close. Ethan, they won't stop. He wrapped an arm around them both. Inside. Now. Once the door shut, he locked it and turned off the lights. The thunder outside rolled like distant judgment. They'll move on, he said quietly, though even he didn't believe it. Emma peeked from behind Sophie's skirt. Daddy Ethan, are we in trouble again? He knelt down, wiping rain from her hair. No, sweetheart. Sometimes storms come just to remind us how strong we are. Sophie watched him, the steadiness in his eyes, the gentleness in his voice. The man who once lived behind boardroom walls now carried calm like armor. You really mean to face all this alone? She asked. He looked at her, a faint smile tugging his lips. I'm not alone anymore. She reached for his hand, the rain hammering the roof above them. For the first time, she didn't resist. 2 days later, the storm outside broke, and so did the one inside the media. The narrative shifted. Editorials began to defend him. Parents, teachers, single mothers wrote in letters of support. A viral op-ed titled "The CEO Who Remembered His Heart" reached 10 million views. On Twitter, one line from his speech trended for 3 straight days. A company can replace a CEO, but a child can't replace her father. Even Reed Innovations investors began to backtrack, praising his honesty under pressure. The very storm that was meant to destroy him had washed the dirt from his name. Ethan stood once more at the window that night, Sophie beside him, Emma asleep on the couch between them. The rain had stopped, leaving the world smelling of new beginnings. You turned chaos into something beautiful, Sophie said softly. He shook his head. No. You did. You gave me something worth protecting. Outside, the moonlight pooled across the vineyard, silver and quiet. Ethan placed his arm around her shoulders, his voice low. This isn't over. But whatever comes next, we face it together. Sophie nodded. Together. And for the first time since the night in Bryant Park, Ethan Reed didn't feel like he was surviving a storm. He felt like he'd become its calm. The morning of the hearing dawned pale and cold, the kind of New York winter light that bleaches the city into silence. Outside the Manhattan family court, crowds had already gathered, reporters clutching microphones, protesters holding signs that read, "Let him be a father," and "Love over legacy." Inside, the air was thick with murmurs, tension, and the faint echo of camera shutters. The case had been dubbed by the media as the Reed custody trial, a public reckoning between power and love. At the center of it sat Ethan Reed, no longer a CEO, no longer the golden boy of the American corporate dream, just a man in a gray suit, his hands clasped in quiet resolve. Beside him sat Sophie Rivers, her hair pulled back neatly, her eyes calm but full of fear. And between them, in a small floral dress and pink hairband, sat Emma, her feet barely reaching the floor. Across the aisle, Margaret Reed entered with her entourage of lawyers, her presence commanding as ever. Her pearl earrings glinted beneath the courtroom lights, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at her son. Not once. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a weary compassion, adjusted her glasses. This court recognizes the petition of Mrs. Margaret Reed to seek temporary guardianship of minor child Emma Brooks, citing concerns over emotional instability and the fitness of Mr. Ethan Reed as a parent. Sophie inhaled sharply, but Ethan rested a reassuring hand on her arm. His voice, when it came, was calm. Your Honor, I'm not fighting for control. I'm fighting for truth. Margaret's attorney stood. Mr. Reed has publicly admitted to concealing an illegitimate child. He has resigned under scandal, caused massive financial damage to shareholders, and displayed erratic emotional behavior unbecoming of a guardian. This child's welfare must be safeguarded from chaos. Ethan rose slowly, every movement deliberate. With respect, my daughter is not a shareholder, he said quietly. She doesn't need quarterly returns. She needs love, consistency, and the freedom to be a child. The attorney smirked, spoken like a man who's never raised one. Ethan's eyes hardened. You're right. I didn't get the chance. Because someone made sure I wouldn't. He turned to his mother. 5 years ago, you stole my family from me. You let me bury an empty coffin while my daughter learned to walk without me. That's not protection. That's cruelty wrapped in power. Margaret's voice broke its icy control. I did what I had to. I built an empire from nothing. You think love would have survived the headlines? You would have lost everything. I did lose everything, he said softly. But it wasn't because of Sophie. It was because I believed you. For the first time, the courtroom fell silent, not from tension, but from truth. Margaret's hands trembled, the mask beginning to crack. Sophie took the stand next. Her testimony was quiet but devastating. She spoke of the night she woke in the hospital, the threats, the payments made in silence. She told me Ethan had moved on, that if I ever tried to contact him, I'd destroy his life. So I disappeared to save his. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she kept her composure. Your Honor, he's not an unstable man. He's a father who was never given a chance. Then came the moment that would decide everything. The judge looked toward the witness list. Is the child willing to speak? Ethan froze. Your Honor, she's only 4. But before he could finish, Emma slid off her chair and walked to the front. Her small shoes tapped gently against the courtroom floor. Everyone held their breath as she climbed onto the stand, legs swinging. The judge smiled kindly. Hello, Emma. Do you know why you're here today? Emma nodded solemnly. Yes, ma'am. You want to know who I want to live with? Margaret's attorney leaned forward. And who would that be, sweetheart? Emma turned her gaze toward Ethan, her little voice steady. My daddy. Because he stayed when the rain came. The courtroom seemed to inhale all at once. Even the judge's eyes softened. Emma continued, her words innocent but piercing. Grandma says Daddy's bad for my future. But Daddy fixes things. He fixed my bear. He fixes my heart when it hurts. He doesn't yell. He just hugs. She paused, thinking carefully. And Mommy says love isn't money. It's showing up. Daddy shows up. Tears streamed down Sophie's face. Ethan lowered his head, fighting to breathe. Even Margaret looked shaken, blinking hard as if seeing her granddaughter for the first time. The judge's gavel struck once, restoring order. Thank you, Emma. You may sit. An hour later, after reviewing testimonies, the judge returned with her verdict. The courtroom held its breath. In light of the evidence presented and the clear bond between father and child, this court denies the petition for temporary guardianship. Custody of Emma Brooks shall remain with her biological parents, Ethan Reed and Sophie Rivers. The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through cloud. Sophie covered her mouth, sobbing in relief. Ethan closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. Across the room, Margaret Reed sat motionless. Then, slowly, she rose. The years of pride and control seemed to fall away from her shoulders. For the first time, she looked not like a matriarch, but like a mother. As the courtroom emptied, she approached Ethan, voice trembling. I thought I was saving you. He met her eyes. You were saving your legacy. You just forgot I was part of it. Margaret nodded weakly. I see that now. Her eyes flicked toward Emma, who smiled and waved. The old woman's lips quivered, a silent apology forming. Then she turned and walked away. Ethan stood for a long time, watching her disappear down the corridor. Sophie slipped her hand into his. Emma tugged his sleeve. Daddy, did we win? He crouched down, smiling through his tears. We didn't win, sweetheart. We got home. Outside, The cameras flashed again, but this time, the noise couldn't touch him. Ethan Reed walked out of the courthouse with his daughter in one arm, Sophie's hand in the other, the storm finally behind them. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a man judged by the world. He felt like a man redeemed by love. The fog rolled in from the bay that morning, soft and golden, wrapping the San Francisco shoreline in quiet light. The newly restored brick building at the edge of the wharf stood tall against it. 3 stories of glass and warmth, a beacon for anyone who'd ever felt lost. Above the door, carved in steel and sunlight, hung the words, "The Lighthouse Project, a home for single parents and forgotten children." Ethan Reed stood beneath the sign, his suit replaced by rolled sleeves and a navy work jacket. Paint still smudged his hands. He smiled faintly as Sophie brushed sawdust from his shoulder. "You realize you could have hired someone for this," she teased. "I did," he said, grinning. "But they kept calling me sir. That's not what this place is about." Sophie shook her head, laughter dancing in her eyes. "You've changed, Ethan Reed." He looked around, at the volunteers painting walls, the smell of freshly baked bread from the kitchen, the sound of hammers and children's laughter echoing down the hall. "No," he said softly. "I just came home." Inside, sunlight spilled through the wide windows. The main hall had been transformed into a community center, part daycare, part classroom, part art studio. On one wall hung a mural Sophie had painted herself, a lighthouse casting its beam over a stormy sea, guiding tiny paper boats toward shore. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Family isn't who you're born to, it's who stays to love you." Emma Reed, age 5. Emma ran in now, wearing overalls splattered with color, her shoes squeaking on the polished floor. "Daddy! Mommy! Everyone's here!" she shouted. "Even Grandma!" Sophie blinked, turning toward the doorway. There stood Margaret Reed, her hair softer, her posture smaller. She carried a tray of homemade cookies, awkward but sincere. The woman who had once commanded empires now looked simply human. Ethan walked forward, heart steady but cautious. "You came." Margaret's eyes glistened. "I didn't know if I'd be welcome." He smiled gently. "The door's open for everyone here. That's kind of the point." Emma ran to her grandmother, wrapping tiny arms around her waist. "Grandma brought cookies. Mommy says cookies make everything better." Margaret laughed, a sound Ethan couldn't remember hearing since childhood. She might be right. Sophie stepped closer, handing her an apron. "You can help in the kitchen if you'd like. We're short on hands." Margaret hesitated, then tied the apron strings, her fingers trembling. "I'd like that very much." For the first time in years, 3 generations of the Reed family stood in one room, not divided by wealth or pride, but bound by forgiveness. Later that afternoon, the hall filled with guests for the grand opening. Journalists who once chased scandal now carried notebooks full of hope. Local officials, artists, single parents, and children gathered around as Ethan took the small stage beneath the mural. He adjusted the microphone, the sea breeze slipping through the open doors. "A few years ago," he began, "I thought legacy was measured by towers of glass and profit margins. I thought love was something that slowed you down. I was wrong." He glanced at Sophie, standing near the front, her smile soft and sure. "This project was born out of brokenness. Mine. But sometimes, the cracks are where the light gets in. The Lighthouse Project isn't about me. It's about every parent who stayed when it would have been easier to walk away. Every child who still believes the world can be kind." Applause rose, steady and heartfelt. Ethan's eyes found Emma, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her friends, drawing lighthouses in crayon. She once told me, Ethan continued, voice thickening, that dads fix broken things. She was right. But what she didn't know is that she fixed me first. The room grew quiet. Tears shimmered in more than a few eyes. Sophie reached for Margaret's hand. The older woman didn't resist. Ethan raised his gaze, finishing softly. Power builds empires. Love builds homes, and sometimes that's all the world really needs. The crowd stood, clapping, not for wealth or fame, but for redemption. That evening, when the guests had gone and the sunset painted the bay in streaks of pink and amber, Ethan and Sophie sat together on the front steps. Emma lay asleep against his shoulder, her small breaths steady, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. The lighthouse mural glowed behind them in the golden light. Sophie rested her head against his arm. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The old life?" He thought for a long moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but only the part where I believed I had to earn love. Turns out I didn't. I just had to see it." She smiled, her eyes glassy with emotion. "You found it." He looked down at Emma. "No," he said gently. "It found me." The sound of waves drifted up from the shore, slow, rhythmic, forgiving. Across the water, the lighthouse beam swept once, twice, steady and sure. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing in the salt air, the scent of Sophie's paint-stained hands, the warmth of the little girl asleep in his arms. For the first time, peace didn't feel like something distant. It lived here, in laughter, in forgiveness, in the quiet pulse of love that asked for nothing in return. Epilogue. 2 years later, the Lighthouse Project had spread to 5 cities. Thousands of families found shelter, work, and hope beneath its name. Ethan split his time between the Bay and Napa, teaching leadership workshops not about profit, but purpose. Sophie's art therapy program became a model for children in trauma recovery. And every evening, without fail, Emma climbed the lighthouse stairs and switched on the beam herself. "For people who are still finding their way home," she would say. From the boardrooms of New York to the vineyards of Napa, from a grave mistake to a living miracle, Ethan Reed's story became less about power and more about promise. Because in the end, love, like a lighthouse, doesn't ask where you've been. It only shows you the way back. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love can rebuild what power destroys, please subscribe and stay with us for more stories of healing, hope, and second chances. Because somewhere out there, another light is waiting to be found.